So I initially started out as a player. I played electric guitar and bass when I was a young teenager. After initially becoming curious about how they were made, I discovered that classical guitar making was actually far more alluring to me and something I wanted to pursue. I think I probably saw a picture of the braces on the inside of the guitar soundboard, and that would have persuaded me. So I corresponded with a few luthiers over email to see how I could learn how to build guitars. Eventually, when I was about 14, I ended up visiting Rogers Tuning Machines, their workshop in Leicester. At that time, I was adamant I'd be building the whole guitar, including the tuning machines. While I was studying at Newark College, building my first guitar, I was able to visit a collection of guitars called granary guitars. These were historical instruments built by most of the notable makers that you could think of. In fact, I can still recall a Daniel Friedrich guitar there and Vicente Arias guitar. I can see them in my mind, even though I was too young to know who they were at the time. The proprietor found it quite funny that I was happy to just look at the guitars for hours on end. I wasn't too interested in playing them, just wanted to behold them and was interested to hear what they sounded like. Some makers approach building as from a player's perspective. My love of the guitar comes from somewhere else, but I still love it just as much. I specialise in classical and flamenco guitars. I build the classical guitars with Indian rosewood back and sides and a spruce or cedar top. Everything is quite traditional. I've stuck to those traditional woods because they're tried and tested and very stable as well. There's not much difference between the way I build and the way the old Spanish makers built 100 years ago. I still use hand tools for almost everything, except for buffing the finish on the guitars. I'm building roughly a guitar a month with a bit of an overlap where I'm varnishing one guitar and also starting the next one at the same time. In comparison to the classicals, the flamenco guitars are far lighter and built using Spanish cypress for the backs and sides. Consequently, it has a different sound, which is hopefully more alluring for flamenco music. I'm also exploring other avenues of guitar making, having recently built a steel string guitar, as well as a no-mix double top guitar. I have put quite some energy into making sure the workmanship and finish on the guitars is as refined as possible. There's a certain expected standard to be met, at least a standard I have in my head, which I want to meet. And I've been pretty OCD about reaching that level, but reckon it's worth the effort. A guitar maker who particularly inspires me is Paul Fisher. He has a book I've read called Let the Woods Speak, and I just love checking out his guitars because simply looking at them, you can tell he's been building his whole life, because every aspect and idea is really, really refined. I think it's about balancing many different variables rather than there just being one quality which makes a great guitar. If there is one variable that has the potential to make a great guitar consistently, then that's a careful and attentive guitar maker. I still find the level of care required for each stage of the guitar making process to be quite remarkable. There must be 1,000 small steps to building a guitar, and each one can be investigated and fine-tuned and will affect the final sound of the instrument. Also, I think the intended use of a guitar has to be borne in mind. For example, a concert performer needs a guitar which sounds good to the audience and carries, whereas a player at home really requires a guitar which sounds good to them. Being in lockdown was initially good for me. The reason is I think my guitars have improved exponentially more than they would have done had I been allowed to attend things like guitar festivals, when I just needed to focus on my building and workmanship. After Christmas, I did have the brainwave of dropping my guitars off to people who I wanted to get feedback from. Since I couldn't invite them into my workshop, I would leave the guitar with them for a week or so. And I reckon I got much more accurate feedback than if they'd just tried it for a few minutes in my workshop. After lockdown, I'm definitely eager to get my guitars out there and speak to some guitarists in person. I love classical guitar players. I'm always fascinated to know how they found the guitar and what music they like to play. To me, finding out someone plays the classical guitar is really pleasant and surprising. It's just a really wholesome interest to have. The thing is, I'm not a player myself. I'm first and foremost an enormous fan of the instrument, not just as a builder, but as a listener. So me and players both share a passion, just from a different angle. I would say the excitement a guitarist might feel visiting a guitar maker is the same thing I feel when I meet a player. I really do listen to what players tell me about my guitars and their own guitars. Since I'm not a player, that's really an essential aspect of my building. After lockdown, since I'm really delighted with my current guitars, I'm looking forward to meeting all kinds of players. Professional players and students interest me greatly, so I do think pro players and builders are truly two sides of the same coin. I love it when I find someone who has found their passion and hasn't really compromised, just made it work somehow. And sometimes their sheer authenticity is palpable. I have a favourite player for the past few years. She's Belgian and she's called Raphaela Smits and plays an 8-string guitar, I believe. Yeah, I took a day trip to meet her to measure a famous 8-string guitar she has. The guitar was by Vicente Arias, built about 120 years ago. It was great. I intend to make a copy this year. That trip, it was like travelling to meet Dumbledore to measure the Elder Wand, or like going to meet Segovia, just really epic, and she really was the best. She even gave me some genuine Belgian chocolate. Yeah, Rogers are probably the most famous tuning machine makers. The workshop was really inspiring to see, especially as I was a 14-year-old when I went there. The son, Rob, actually runs a larger operation now in Canada, but I visited their first workshop where it all began, where the dad, Dave, is still working. It was mainly just a couple of lathes in a small home workshop downstairs, and it was pretty cute because Dave mentioned that he hoped the noise wasn't disturbing the neighbours, but that they hadn't ever mentioned anything. And that's about 40 years or so of working and worrying about the neighbours. As you can see, I'm building a guitar right now, which will be done in mid-April. It's a classical guitar with cypress back and sides, and it has Torres style bracing. At some point this year I'll make a copy of that Vicente Arias 8-string guitar, and other than that I just plan to build some of my standard classical and flamenco guitars. I was also thinking of making a few steel strings. Mostly I'm just looking forward to connecting with lots of new players after lockdown.